up, nerds? I'm Tom, and I'm doing our new form of reviews where it's all pictures and voice, and you don't really see my face, except you're seeing my face right now, but that's just for reference. That's about to go away. Today we're talking about Cryo. This is a new worker placement game that is, I think, like thematically, it's like your ship crashed, landed on a planet, and the planet's about to go real cold, so you need to get all of your cryopods with people in them into the caverns below. Normally I don't care too much about theme, but I think explaining the theme kind of helps with the mechanics a little bit, because the main thing is that you have all these pods, like 20 or something, on the board. You're going to place out workers to get resources and stuff, and you're going to use most of the resources to get those pods off of the main board onto your player board, and then onto your player from your player board into the caverns below. And that's the main way you get points. So that's like, a huge chunk of the game. You use a lot of resources to do that. And then the other big part of the game is that there's multi-use cards. The cards can either be like the top part will give you a special ability, the side off to the left will be an endgame scoring thing, or the main part of the card is a ship. So you can play the card onto your board, and then once you get the pods from the main board onto your player board, you put them on the ship, and then later on the ship will launch and put the pods underground into the caverns. And the pods are worth points in the caverns, but also a lot of the caverns have a majority scoring thing. Like whoever has the most pods on this little disc will get 4 points. Whoever has the second most will get 2 points, or whatever. This is a really tight worker placement game, and by that I mean that like every resource matters. Like even on your player board, the maximum number of resources you can have is 4. So that goes to show you that each resource is important. I mean, except for energy, I think your max is like 7 or 8, but you're never going to have that many anyways. Or maybe you do, but I never did. The game was even kind of billed that way. Like the designers were talking about it that way, saying that it's very tight. Like it's well designed, but it is every resource matters. If I could do something to get one more green than I thought I was going to, oh, that's a big difference. Versus, some games you could be like, I could get 6 of these resources, but if I play my cards right, I could get 9 of these resources. Then I could do these 3 things, So like and there's engine building in that, but still not a super huge amount. Like a good example is, whenever you place a worker, which is actually another fun thing, is that you place a worker kind of like in between spots, and then you pick one of the spots that are adjacent to it to trigger. And a lot of them are this little tokens that just have resources on them. You can either, so you place the worker, and then you say, okay, I'm going to trigger this token. You either take the token and just throw it away and gain whatever resources is on there, 1 red or 2 greens or whatever, or you can take that token, and instead of getting resources for it now, you can place it on your player board. And then whenever you recall your workers will kind of go back to little docks that have those tokens on them, and you'll gain the resources there. Well, why would I want to gain the resources right now when I could gain them every single turn? Well, only one slot on your player board for this thing is it where you actually just straight up get the resources. The other slots are like exchanges. Oh, I could spend an energy to draw a card, or I could spend a green to get an extra pod or whatever, right? And that's what a lot of this game is. Just straight up gaining resources is not as common as exchanging resources. It's a much bigger thing. It does kind of feel like there is a bit of a pattern to the game. Like getting the green resources lets you take your pods off the board onto your player board, right? Like that's a big deal. The gray resource lets you draw cards, which you need because you're going to need them for ships mostly, but the endgame scoring cards are actually a pretty big deal. You get a lot of points for those. The red resource you generally exchange into energy, and energy is the main thing you spend to get your pods down into the caverns, that underground part. Not exactly that. Like, sometimes you will have to spend actual resources, other resources to actually get on the caverns down there. Like, it's not, but that's like the long and short of it. So it does kind of feel like at the beginning of the game, you kind of want to get greens, and grays are also pretty important early on, or more towards the middle of the game. And then towards the end of the game, having the reds is important to switch it over to energy, because there isn't really a spot on the board for energy, really. There's also nanite is like a wild resource, so some things require that, but it's mostly just used as a wild. And it does kind of feel like the game, you want to play it in a specific way. Like I said, that greens first, probably orange, not orange, probably gray later. Then the reds switched into energy towards the end, and then just launch a bunch of pods whenever you can. All the while doing that, you're going to want to build some semblance of an engine. Yeah, you do want to get some of those tokens back on your boards. That way, when you recall, you gain resources. There's also another spot where you can put pods where you gain resources when you recall. There's also, again, I said you could put cards, you could tuck cards into the top of your board so they give you special abilities. And all those things are strong, but you're never going to build a huge engine. Like you're really not. You're not going to put a token in every single slot on your board and have all 3 of the slots at the top where you can put special ability cards. You're not going to have all those full and still win the game. The game is surprisingly short also because of that. Like, you're going to want to build a couple of engine-y things. You want to put like 1 or 2 things, tokens down on your board. Maybe do that other resource generation portion on the board that I said. Maybe have, 1 or 2 cards, and like that's it. Because you need to spend actions launching ships down into the caverns below and making sure you get all of your ships too. You can't just spend a lot of time focusing on your engine, because as the game progresses, there are these little tokens that are on the board. After every time you recall, you trigger one of the tokens that's on the board. And that's actually what triggers the end of the game. There are all those tokens out there. Whenever you recall, you trigger one of the tokens, which is either going to be just an extra resource, or it'll be like a little explosion symbol. And that'll actually start exploding areas where you have your pods. So you do kind of want to bum rush at the beginning to get your pods off there, because if they explode, they're gone for forever. I mean, I think there's 1 card effect that'll bring them back. Now, granted, you kind of accept that you're going to lose a couple pods, and you're probably not going to launch every single pod down to the caverns. I mean, that would be nice, but you kind of look at it and say, well, I'm willing to lose 2 or 3 and then get the rest down there and get my engine going and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so now I feel like I've explained the game sort of enough that you would have an idea. And overall, my thoughts are that it's good, but like, it's a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. It is a very well-designed game. Like, that tight aspect is definitely there. It definitely feels like something you need to tell people ahead of time. You're not going to build your whole engine. You're not going to get every single section, you're not going to have every single dock or whatever it's called filled, and you're not going to have all those special abilities. You're going to have to pick and choose. You're going to have to really bob and weave. The cards you get at opening hand, you're going to have to look at them and say, okay, I'm going to try and utilize these really well. Because you can also ditch a card to scrap it for resources. And yeah, you might do that every once in a while, but cards are hard to come by, and they're important. You really need ships, and you really need scoring cards. And the special ability cards, yeah, you probably don't need 3 of them, but if you can get a good one, yeah, it can really turn the tide of the game for you, and if you have a really good special ability. I feel like it's a game that you need to tell people that it's very tight, and you also need to make it very obvious what the resources are for. Green is for getting your pods, gray is for getting cards, red is for turning into energy, and nanite is for other things, and it's a wild, like you need to kind of explain, the flow of the game, not telling people exactly what to do, but just saying, hey, this is the way most people are going to kind of gear their turns towards. And also let people know that the game can end real quickly. There's like a really big token that once it gets placed out on the board, anybody who recalls can trigger that token and end the game immediately. And you don't have to recall once all of your workers are out there. You can recall after 1 worker is out there, so it gets to a point towards the end where it's like, wow, I don't know, I could have 4 more turns, or I could have 0 more turns, Now, I don't want to come off sounding too negative. It's possible that, it sounds like I didn't really love the game. I think I really liked it a lot. I think the best other game I can compare it to would be Marco Polo. Either The Voyages of Marco Polo or Marco Polo 2. And yep, that's why I showed you that picture of me with Marco Polo earlier. That was foreshadowing. Ba-boom! I really like the Marco Polo games, but they are really tight. Every resource matters. You're never going to be able to do everything you want to do. You have to pick some things and kind of stick with it. But they're very well designed. If I were to say every resource matters, there's a big difference in between being, well, this thing costs 5 resources. I can at most get 1 resource a turn, so I'm just going to spend the next 5 turns just gaining 1 resource, and then on that 5th turn, I can do that thing. That's just boring. In here, there's a lot of options, I just can't do all of them. Or maybe, if I turn this resource, if I, come over here and turn all these into nanite, then maybe I could spend a nanite coming down here, and I could put pods here and beat you out there and beat you out here maybe. I don't know, that's going to be contested because you still have a ship that you could launch, and I know you could come back here and take this from me, because I mean, again, you're incentivized to put pods down there because they're 2 each, so maybe you do want to win this from it. You know what I mean? Like, there's more going on. You just can't do everything. So it leads to a lot of dicey choices, and you really have to plan ahead of time for it. And in this game, that feels pretty good. Yeah, there are issues. And I think that length of the game is the biggest part of it. I also think that um, two players isn't that great. Now, this is not a new opinion for me. If you've been watching our channel for a while, this is going to sound very familiar, but if this is the first video you've ever seen of mine, if ever a game says that the player count is 2 to 4, 2 to 5, or 2 to 6 players, which are very common player counts, I always think that the two-player is never going to be the same as a multiplayer experience. And in here, that is true. You're just kind of, you're going to go over there, well, I'm going to come over here. You take those caverns down there, I'll take these caverns here, and that's kind of it. And also, you don't even really feel like you're going to block another person's spot, because you place in between spots. It's always like, well, okay, you place to the right of that action and did it. Well, I'm going to place to the left of that action and then do it. It doesn't, in a higher player count game, yes, that becomes a factor, and it's a lot tighter, and it feels like a better experience, as with most games that are what this game is, 2 to 4 players. So I feel like I've been ranting a lot in this video. I like the game. It's a really fun experience with an asterisk. This is not going to be for everybody. You have to like tight resource games. Think Marco Polo, or maybe even like some of the Stonemaier games tend to feel that way. Like I think Viticulture, I always felt like I was one resource shy of things, that type of thing. But it's very well designed. Better with more players. You kind of need to tell people ahead of time that it's really tight, that it could end real abruptly, and kind of, well, this is kind of the strategy, and this is kind of sort of how you play. You don't have to play like this, but let me just say, if you don't get green early on, you might be hurting. Some of your pods might be exploding. If you're okay with that, you're okay with that, because we even had one guy who only put his like a couple pods in like one cavern space. He lost the game, but not by much, because he actually had 3 endgame scoring cards that got him a ton of points. Like if he had played his cards, no pun intended, slightly differently, he still could have focused on the cards, the endgame scoring cards, the way that he did, and maybe threw a couple more things in the caverns below, and maybe won. So you don't have to just focus on putting pods in the caverns, but that's a big part of it. Anyways, I'm going to put a purchase link to Cryo in the description box down below. I recommend you check it out if you're a fan of Marco Polo or Stonemaier type games. Also down there is going to be a link for Game Toppers. I played Cryo at my friendly local game store, so I don't have any pictures of me playing it on the Game Topper, but Game Toppers is awesome. And anyways, subscribe to our channel so you will never be bored.